On tonight's story on Division 8, we're heading deep into the American Midwest to a place locals simply call Miller's Creek. In the summer of 1991, this quiet farming community became the center of a series of incidents that were never fully explained. Damaged properties, missing livestock, and witnesses describing something that didn't behave like any known animal. Police reports were filed. Evidence was documented, and then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. Tonight, we're breaking down what happened at Miller's Creek, and why, more than 30 years later, residents still avoid the land after dark. Miller's Creek doesn't appear unusual on a map. It's a narrow waterway cutting through southern Indiana farmland, bordered by second-growth forest and long abandoned service roads once used by logging crews in the early 20th century. By the 1990s, most of that industry had vanished, leaving behind scattered foundations, rusted equipment, and land parcels that quietly reverted back to nature. What makes Miller's Creek different isn't what's there, it's what people stopped doing there. Long before the events of 1991, locals had already developed habits around the area. Children were warned not to play near the creek after sunset. Hunters avoided setting blinds too close to the tree line. Even farmers whose land bordered the waterway tended to fence off larger sections than necessary, allowing the ground near the creek to remain untouched. When asked why, most residents gave the same answer. It just didn't feel right. County records show no major accidents, chemical spills, or industrial disasters tied to the area. Environmental surveys conducted in the 1970s showed nothing out of the ordinary. Wildlife populations were normal. Water samples were clean. On paper, Miller's Creek was unremarkable. But small details kept surfacing. The 1980s, livestock owners occasionally reported animals refusing to cross certain sections of pasture near the creek. Horses would stop abruptly, ears pinned back, refusing to move forward even under pressure. Dogs brought near the water often became agitated, whining, pulling at their leashes, or attempting to flee. These incidents were never formally logged. They were chalked up to instincts, scent trails, or changes in weather. That changed in early June of 1991. Farmers along the eastern bank of Miller's Creek began finding damage that didn't match storms or predators. Fence posts were loosened without being broken. Feed barrels were overturned but not torn open. Corn stalks were bent downward in wide arcs, pressed flat rather than snapped. What disturbed people most was the lack of tracks. The soil showed impressions, shallow, inconsistent depressions, but nothing that matched hooves, paws, or human footwear. In several cases, the ground appeared compressed in elongated shapes, as if something heavy had rested there briefly before moving on. On June 12th, a report was finally made to the county sheriff's office. It wasn't about a creature. It was about sound. A resident living less than a quarter mile from the creek claimed that late at night, the area would fall unnaturally quiet. Insects stopped. Frogs went silent. Then, after several minutes, the quiet would break, not with noise, but with movement. Grass shifting, leaves parting, the sense that something was passing through without being seen. 2 nights later, the first eyewitness encounter occurred, and once it started, Miller's Creek would never feel empty again. The first person to see it clearly was David Collins. At the time, Collins was 38 years old and worked nights maintaining heavy equipment at a limestone quarry outside of town. He was known locally as quiet, reliable, and not prone to exaggeration. He had no prior interest in the paranormal and had lived near Miller's Creek his entire life without incident. On the night of June 14, 1991, Collins left work just after midnight and began his usual drive home along State Road 46. The road runs parallel to the tree line for nearly half a mile, with Miller's Creek hidden just beyond the woods. About 10 minutes into the drive, Collins noticed movement ahead of him. At first, he assumed it was a deer stepping onto the road. He slowed, preparing to honk or brake. But as his headlights reached the shape, he realized something was wrong. The figure did not move like an animal. Collins later told investigators that it appeared to reposition itself rather than walk. Its limbs remained close to its body, shifting only when it needed to change direction. The torso was wide and flat, tapering unevenly toward the ground. There was no visible neck. When the headlights fully illuminated it, the figure paused. Then it turned. Not its entire body, just the upper portion. Collins said that's when he noticed the eyes. They did not reflect light. Most animals produce eye shine under headlights. This did not. Instead, the eyes appeared dark and recessed, absorbing the beam rather than reacting to it. Collins described a sensation of pressure in his chest, like standing too close to heavy machinery. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, the figure stepped off the road. It did not rush. It did not react defensively. It simply moved into the tree line and vanished between the trunks without making a sound. No branches snapped. No brush shifted violently. The woods seemed to close behind it. Collins remained stopped on the road for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally drove away, he reported feeling disoriented, as if time had passed differently while the encounter occurred. He arrived home later than expected, but could not account for the delay. He did not report the incident immediately. It wasn't until 2 days later, after hearing neighbors discuss damaged fences and flattened crops, that Collins contacted the sheriff's office. His statement was recorded, but no patrol was sent to the area that night. Deputies classified the encounter as a possible misidentification. But then, more reports followed. Within 48 hours, 2 additional residents described seeing movement near the creek. Both mentioned the same unnatural silence beforehand. Both said the shape appeared to separate from the darkness rather than emerge from it. And both said the same thing when asked to describe it. It didn't feel like an animal. By the end of the week, Miller's Creek was no longer just a place people avoided. It had become a place something was actively moving through. By the 3rd week of June, Miller's Creek was no longer just the subject of late-night conversations. Whatever had been moving through the area had begun interacting with the environment in ways that could no longer be ignored. The first physical evidence came from the Henderson farm, located less than half a mile downstream from the initial sighting. On the morning of June 21st, the Hendersons discovered their cattle clustered tightly against the far fence line of the pasture, refusing to move. One calf was missing. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no drag marks. No tracks leading away. What investigators did find were 3 elongated impressions pressed into the soft earth near the creek bank. Each depression was smooth, shallow, and unevenly spaced, as if something heavy had lowered itself to the ground briefly before rising again. The soil around the impressions was compacted outward, not torn or displaced. The sheriff's office documented the site but could not classify the markings. 2 nights later, another call came in. This time, it was Elaine Turner, whose property bordered the tree line directly. Turner reported hearing sustained movement behind her house just after 2 a.m. She described it as something circling, slow, methodical, and deliberate. When she turned on her exterior lights, the motion stopped immediately. At sunrise, Turner discovered damage to her back porch. The wooden railing had been flexed outward, not broken, as if tested for strength. The surface of the deck showed faint linear scuffs running parallel to each other. Deputies noted that the marks were too wide apart to be made by claws and too uniform to be accidental. Again, there were no tracks. As reports increased, the sheriff's department began conducting overnight patrols near the creek. Officers noted repeated equipment malfunctions while parked in the area, radios crackling, engines stalling briefly, and flashlights dimming without warning. None of these issues occurred elsewhere during their shifts. On June 26th, Deputy Mark Ridley reported seeing movement near the water while stationed in his cruiser. He described a large, low silhouette crossing from one side of the creek to the other without splashing. When he exited the vehicle to investigate, the area went completely silent. Ridley later admitted that he felt an overwhelming urge to leave. No order was given, no threat was visible, but every instinct told him not to remain there. The following morning, deputies found damage along the creek bank where Ridley had been parked. Grass was flattened in a wide arc, pressed firmly into the mud. Tree branches above the area showed signs of being bent downward, as if something tall had passed beneath them. Still, no clear footprints were recovered. By the end of June, Miller's Creek had become an active investigation, unofficially. There were no press releases, no public warnings. Residents were advised to stay indoors at night and report anything unusual. Behind closed doors, deputies admitted they were dealing with something they could not identify. And then, on the night of June 29th, the thing stopped staying near the creek. It began moving closer to homes. The first confirmed close encounter occurred just after midnight on June 29, 1991. Thomas Greer, a volunteer firefighter and lifelong resident of Miller's Creek, had stepped outside his home to investigate why his dog was refusing to stop barking. The animal stood rigid at the edge of the yard, facing the tree line, hackles raised and teeth bared, but it would not advance. Greer followed the dog's gaze. At the far edge of the property, near an abandoned service road, something was standing partially concealed by brush. At first, Greer assumed it was a piece of old machinery or a fallen tree shifted by wind. Then it moved. Not forward, not backward. It adjusted. Greer later said the movement reminded him of weight settling, as if whatever he was looking at was constantly redistributing its mass. The shape appeared taller than a man, but unnaturally wide, with no clearly defined head. The surface of it seemed textured, absorbing the moonlight rather than reflecting it. As Greer watched, the sound around him faded. Crickets stopped. Wind dropped. Even the dog went silent. Greer described feeling pressure behind his eyes and a tightening in his chest. He attempted to step backward, but found his legs slow to respond, as if his body was lagging behind his thoughts. The shape moved closer. Not quickly, deliberately. Greer shouted, breaking the silence. The moment his voice carried, the thing shifted again, lowering itself slightly, as if reacting to the sound rather than the presence of a person. Then, without warning, it withdrew. The movement was sudden and smooth, compressing downward and sliding back into the tree line. Branches bent out of the way but did not snap. The brush parted and then returned to place, leaving no visible path. Greer immediately called the sheriff. Deputies arrived within minutes, but the property showed no sign of disturbance. No tracks, no broken foliage, no indication that anything large had been there at all. What unsettled them was Greer himself. He was pale, shaking, and had difficulty describing the encounter without losing his train of thought. Deputies noted that his pulse remained elevated for over an hour after the incident. That same night, 2 other residents reported hearing movement around their homes, slow, circling patterns that stopped the moment lights were turned on. By morning, Miller's Creek was on edge. The sheriff's department increased patrols and requested assistance from state wildlife officials. Residents were advised to remain indoors after dark and to keep animals secured. But whatever had been moving through the area no longer appeared to be avoiding people. It was approaching homes, testing boundaries. And for the first time, witnesses began asking the same question. Was it curious, or was it learning? July 3rd, 1991, was the last night Miller's Creek changed. By that point, nearly every household near the creek was on alert. Lights were left on overnight. Firearms were kept within reach. Several residents chose to stay with relatives in neighboring towns, unwilling to remain near the water after dark. Just before 1 a.m., the sheriff's office received its first call. A resident on the north side of the creek reported hearing heavy movement in the field behind his home. He described it as something passing back and forth repeatedly, never entering the light, never fully retreating. While deputies were en route, a second call came in from less than a mile away, then a third. All 3 callers described the same thing: silence followed by motion. Deputies converged near the creek with 4 vehicles, forming a loose perimeter along the service road. Flashlights swept the tree line. Engines idled. Radios crackled with interference. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, the grass began to move. Witnesses described a wide section of field flattening outward in a slow, controlled wave, as if something massive was pushing just beneath the surface. The movement stopped roughly 30 yards from the nearest cruiser. No shape emerged. No sound followed. Several deputies reported a strong sense of disorientation. One later stated that it felt like standing too close to a power line, though no electrical infrastructure was present. Then, as suddenly as it began, the movement reversed. The grass rose. The pressure seemed to lift. The silence broke all at once. Insects, wind, distant animals, returning in a way that felt unnatural in itself. By 2:15 a.m., the field was still. Searches conducted at first light found no tracks, no impressions, and no physical evidence beyond flattened vegetation. Wildlife officials could offer no explanation. Soil samples were inconclusive. No environmental anomalies were detected. And after that night, the reports stopped completely. No more sightings, no more sounds, no more damage. Miller's Creek returned to normal, at least on the surface. But residents noticed subtle changes. Animals avoided the water permanently. Crops near the creek grew unevenly for years afterward. Several people involved in the encounters moved away within a decade, unwilling to remain near the area. The sheriff's office quietly closed the file by the end of summer. Officially, nothing unusual had occurred. Unofficially, everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever had been moving through Miller's Creek had left, not because it was driven away, but because it had finished doing whatever it came to do. In the years following the events at Miller's Creek, several attempts were made to apply familiar explanations to what happened there. Wildlife experts suggested misidentified animals. Psychologists pointed to stress and expectation influencing perception. Others argued that the entire incident was the product of rumor, coincidence, and heightened fear spreading through a small community. None of these explanations addressed all the facts. No known animal moves without sound through dense brush while leaving no clear tracks. No predator flattens vegetation without tearing it. And no documented case of mass hysteria explains physical changes to the environment observed by multiple witnesses at the same time. The sheriff who oversaw the investigation retired in 1996. In a private interview conducted years later, he admitted that the case bothered him more than any other in his career. Not because of what was seen, but because of what wasn't. There was never a moment where we could say it was gone, he said. It just stopped showing itself. County records show no further incidents along Miller's Creek, but the land itself remains largely untouched. Property near the water sells below market value. New fencing is placed farther back than necessary. Locals still advise visitors not to linger there after dark, often without offering a reason. As for the witnesses, their accounts never changed. They never claimed it attacked. They never claimed it chased anyone. Only that it moved with purpose and awareness. Today, Miller's Creek looks no different from any other stretch of Midwestern countryside. The water runs quietly. The fields grow back each year. To an outsider, there is nothing to suggest that anything unusual ever occurred. But those who were there remember the silence. They remember how the land seemed to react before it appeared, and how everything returned to normal only after it was gone. And that leaves one question that has never been answered. If nothing happened at Miller's Creek, why does the place still feel watched?